7 weeks. That's how long it took for my daughter to notice I was gone. Not dead, not in a hospital with tubes in my arms, not missing in any way that would make the evening news. Just gone, packed, moved, quietly disappeared from the town where I had lived for 44 years. And for 7 full weeks, not a single person in my family thought to ask where I was. My name is Ruth. I am 72 years old. I raised 2 children, buried my husband, kept a spotless house, remembered every birthday, made every pie from scratch, and drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm to sit in a folding chair and watch my granddaughter play a tree in a 2nd grade Christmas pageant. And it took my family 7 weeks to notice I had left. Before I tell you what happened, what really happened, all of it, including the thing my daughter said when she finally called, I want to ask you something. I want you to be honest with yourself, not with me, with yourself. How many people in your life would notice if you simply stopped calling first? Not if you died, not if something dramatic happened, just if you went quiet and stopped reaching out first. How many people would even notice? Drop it in the comments. Because I spent 44 years absolutely certain I knew the answer to that question. I was so sure. I had built so much. I had given so much. I was the foundation of that family in the same way the ground is the foundation of a house. So constant, so reliable, so always there that nobody thinks about it until it cracks. And then it cracked. And I learned the answer. And I am still learning how to live with what the answer turned out to be. My husband Robert died on a Thursday in March. He'd been sick for 2 years, so in some ways we had time to prepare. We talked about it the way people do when they know what's coming and can't stop it. Carefully, in short sentences, late at night with the lights off. We talked about the bank accounts. We talked about the house. We talked about whether I should stay in town or move somewhere smaller and warmer. We talked about the garden, and whether I could manage it alone, and whether it even mattered. What we didn't talk about was what would happen to me inside. I had been half of something for 43 years. 43 years of another person's breathing in the next room. 43 years of someone asking where the scissors were, someone leaving coffee rings on the counter, someone who needed to know what I thought about things. 43 years of being necessary to a specific human being in the specific, daily, unremarkable way that is actually the most profound thing in the world. And then it was gone. The grief was not romantic. It was not a woman standing on a cliff in a long coat looking at the sea. It was me, in my kitchen, at 2 in the afternoon, standing in front of an open refrigerator for 11 minutes because I couldn't remember what I'd been looking for. It was me driving to the pharmacy and sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes because I couldn't make myself walk in and answer the pharmacist's cheerful question about how I was doing. It was me lying awake at 3 in the morning, listening to the absolute silence of a house that used to breathe and now didn't. But grief is, as I said, a public performance, and everyone wants a role in the first act. For the first year, that whole first raw, terrible year, my children showed up. Tammy called 3 times a week. She brought casseroles in heavy plastic containers, the kind of food that is more comfort than nutrition, all creamy sauces and melted cheese. Noah drove over on weekends and did the things Robert used to do. Checked the gutters, changed the furnace filter, walked through the rooms with a flashlight looking for problems. They sat with me at the kitchen table, drank my coffee, asked how I was sleeping. They held my hand while I cried over Robert's empty recliner. They were present. They were trying. And I was grateful in the enormous, bottomless way that you are grateful for things when you are drowning and someone throws you a rope. The first Thanksgiving without Robert, Tammy organized everything. She called 2 weeks early. She asked what time I wanted to arrive, what I wanted to bring, whether I needed a ride. She put me at the center of the table. She made Robert's favorite sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows on top, even though she always said it was too sweet, because she knew I would need to smell it. I cried in the car on the way home, but they were the softer kind of tears, the kind that come from being held, not the kind that come from being alone. I told myself, this is family. This is what it looks like when it works. I should have paid more attention to what happened next. By the second year, the performance was over. The audience had returned to their own lives. And I understand that, I truly do. My children were not bad people. They had jobs and children and mortgages and their own private exhaustions. They had done what people do when someone they love is in crisis. They had shown up for the crisis. Now the crisis, in their minds, had passed. I was still alive. I was upright. I was managing. What they didn't understand, what I don't think they had the capacity to understand, is that the second year is often worse than the first. In the first year, the world accommodates your grief. In the second year, the world expects you to be over it. And you are not over it. You are just quieter about it, because you have learned that people have a limited tolerance for a sorrow that doesn't resolve. I was quieter, so they assumed I was fine. 2 days before the second Thanksgiving, a cold Tuesday in November, the sky the color of old pewter, I sat at my kitchen table looking at the faded wallpaper Robert and I had hung ourselves 20 years earlier. There was a small bubble near the window frame where the paste had never quite dried flat. I used to mean to fix it. I never did. I picked up my phone and texted Tammy. "What time should I come over on Thursday, sweetheart? Do you need me to bring the sweet potato pies?" I wasn't worried when the reply didn't come immediately. Tammy was a busy woman. She had her own family, her real estate business, her complicated calendar full of school pickups and client dinners, and the 1,000 small obligations of a life being actively lived. I went about my day. I weeded the hydrangeas. I washed the tea towels. I made myself a proper lunch for once, sitting at the table instead of standing over the sink. The reply came at 7 in the evening. I read it once. Then I took off my reading glasses, cleaned them carefully with the hem of my sweater, put them back on, and read it again. "Hey, Mom, we're actually keeping it really small this year. Just us and Tom's family since his parents are coming in from out of state, and it's been a lot of organizing. You've been looking so tired lately, and we figured you'd probably love a quiet day to rest and recharge. Hope you understand. Love you." I sat very still for a long time after reading that. Just us. 2 words, 3 letters each. And I had spent 44 years being the very definition of us. I was the original us. I was the person who had made the people who were now using that word to describe a version of the family that did not include me. I had given birth to the people who formed that pronoun. I wrote 3 different responses. The first was honest. "I'm lonely, Tammy. The house is so quiet I can hear the furnace cycling on and off. Please let me come and sit in the corner of the table. I won't be any trouble." The second was angry. "I taught you how to roast a turkey when you were 19 years old. I showed you how to baste it, how to check the temperature, how to rest it before you carve it. And now I'm not welcome at the table where that turkey will be served?" I deleted both. I typed the response that every aging parent types when they finally understand that their presence has become an obligation rather than a gift. Of course, sweetheart, you all enjoy your day. Don't worry about me. A minute later, she sent back a small heart emoji. It felt like a tip left on a table after a bad meal, a small digital gesture of acknowledgement that cost nothing and meant nothing and was meant to close the transaction. I put the phone face down on the table and sat in Robert's old recliner and looked at the ceiling for a long time. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke at 6 o'clock out of sheer, unadulterated habit. For 35 years, that hour had meant something. It meant the kitchen was already warming. It meant the butter was softening on the counter. The turkey was coming out of its overnight brine. The coffee was brewing. And within an hour, the smell of roasting sage would begin drifting through the whole house like a slow tide. That morning, there was no butter on the counter. I made a single slice of white toast. I boiled water for instant coffee because the smell of a full pot brewing in an empty house had started to feel unbearable. I sat by the window in my good chair and watched the morning news. The anchor was a young woman with very straight teeth who smiled at the camera and said, "Wherever you're gathering today, we hope it's surrounded by the people you love." I changed the channel. By noon, the walls of the house had begun to lean inward. It is a specific kind of feeling, a silent, pressing weight, not dramatic but relentless, like the air pressure before a storm that never quite breaks. I couldn't sit in it anymore. I got in my old sedan and drove to the regional grocery store 20 minutes away. It was the only place I could think of where people would be moving. The parking lot was half full. Other people, I realized, who also needed somewhere to be. We nodded at each other in the produce aisle, we who were buying things we didn't need, just to be somewhere with fluorescent lights and the sound of someone else's cartwheels on linoleum. I bought a small turkey breast and a can of cranberry sauce. I drove home and cooked it alone in the oven that Robert had helped me install. I ate at the kitchen table with a cloth napkin because I refused to be the woman who ate off paper towels on a holiday. Not yet. Not if I could help it. After dinner, I washed the dishes and went to bed at 7:30. I told myself it was a one-time thing. They were adjusting to new family dynamics. Tom's parents were difficult. It was complicated. I was being sensitive because of the grief, because of the second-year darkness, because of all of it. I was wrong. Christmas came in the same pattern. I saw the family group chat, the one I had been quietly removed from the previous spring. By accident, Tammy said. A glitch in the app, she said. Light up on Tammy's public posts with plans I hadn't been included in. Who was bringing what dish? What time dinner would be served? Whether to do a white elephant gift exchange or Secret Santa. I waited for someone to ask me directly. Nobody did. On December 23rd, I called Tammy. "Honey, what time is Christmas dinner? Should I bring anything?" There was a pause that lasted just a moment too long, the kind of pause that tells you the person on the other end is doing a rapid calculation, choosing between several possible answers. "Oh, Mom, didn't Noah tell you? We actually moved it to Christmas Eve this year. Tom's parents had a flight to catch on the 26th, so we shifted everything earlier. It was sort of last minute." I looked at the wall of my kitchen. "When on Christmas Eve?" Another pause. "Well, we did it last night, Mom. Tuesday evening. It's already happened." My hands went numb. "You had Christmas without me? Yesterday?" "We posted pictures. We thought you probably saw them. And honestly, Mom, we figured you'd want a quiet night anyway. It's been such a hard year." "You thought I'd want a quiet night? On Christmas Eve?" "We were trying to be considerate, Mom." I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was not something you say to your daughter on a phone call 2 days before Christmas. What I was thinking was something you carry quietly, alone, to the grocery store on Thanksgiving morning. What I said was, "Send me some of the pictures." She sent 23 photos. My grandchildren opening presents I hadn't known were being given. The table set with Robert's mother's china, the china I had stored carefully in tissue paper for 20 years, the china that was supposed to come to me, that I had assumed would come to me. Everyone wearing matching pajamas that nobody had mentioned ordering. My son Noah making a ridiculous face at the camera with a paper crown on his head, grinning at a Christmas that had happened without me 3 miles away. I looked at every single photo. Then I put the phone down, went to my bedroom, lay on my side of the bed, just my side. I still slept only on my side, and stayed there until the light changed. For the next 3 years, I learned to live as a ghost. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that rattles chains and tips over furniture to get attention. The invisible kind. The kind that moves through familiar rooms and is simply not seen by the people who live there. I found out about my family's life the way you find out about a neighbor's, through social media, through overheard mentions, through accidents of information that nobody intended for me to receive. Easter brunches I didn't know were happening. 4th of July barbecues where my grandchildren played in an inflatable pool I'd never seen, wearing swimsuits I hadn't bought them. A series of birthday parties, Emma's 9th, Emma's 10th, Emma's 11th, each one photographed and posted publicly, full of other grandparents and aunts and family friends, a category I apparently no longer occupied. A graduation party for Jessica's son, my grandson, that I found out about 2 weeks after the fact from a woman at my church who had seen the photos and assumed I had been there. And then there was the lake house. Robert and I had bought the lake house 40 years ago, the summer Tammy was 7 and Noah was 4. It was a small cedar cabin on a lake in the state park, nothing grand, but it had a good dock and a screened porch and a view of the water that turned gold in the late afternoon. We'd spent every summer there for 20 years, the whole family, the tradition so fixed in our calendar that the children had grown up assuming it was simply part of the rhythm of the year, as permanent as the school year or Christmas. After Robert died, Tammy and Noah had quietly assumed stewardship of the property, which was practical. I couldn't manage the upkeep alone, and I couldn't drive the 3 hours each way anymore without my back seizing up. I told myself it was reasonable. I told myself they would include me. One Thursday evening, I was scrolling through my phone and I saw a photograph. David, my son-in-law Tom's brother, who had no particular connection to that lake or that history, had posted a picture of himself on the dock at sunset. Location tagged. 12 people in the photo. A weekend gathering, clearly, coolers and lawn chairs, and a gas grill someone had dragged down to the waterfront. Not a single person in that photo had my eyes, but 3 people did. I drove to the lake house the following Tuesday. I let myself in with my key. I still had my key, and walked through the rooms alone. It smelled different. They had rearranged the furniture. There were new dishes in the kitchen and a new rug in the entryway. Someone had painted the bedroom where Robert and I used to sleep. It was a nice shade of gray, actually, a very tasteful shade of gray. I walked out to the dock and stood there for a long time. The water was very still. The afternoon light was doing that gold thing it does in late summer, lying flat across the surface like a warm hand. A heron flew in from the left and landed in the shallows about 50 feet away. It stood absolutely motionless, waiting. I understood completely. I stood there until the light changed and the heron flew away. Then I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat and made a decision. If my family could build an entire life, holidays, birthdays, summers, milestones, without me, I could build a life without them. I was 70 years old. I had my health. I walked 3 miles every morning. My knees were decent. My mind was clear. I had my retirement savings, Robert's life insurance, and the equity in a house that was paid off and in a good school district and worth more than I'd ever expected. I had absolutely nothing tying me to that town anymore except ghosts and habit. Robert and I had always talked about retiring somewhere quiet, somewhere with clean air and a slower pace and the sound of water nearby. He'd talked about Montana, the mountains, the open sky, the feeling of space. We'd looked at properties once, years before his health declined, just browsing, the way you browse possibilities when you're still young enough to believe they're real. I didn't go to Montana. Instead, I started researching coastal Carolina. I don't know why Carolina specifically. Maybe it was something I'd read once. Maybe it was the particular quality of light in the travel photographs, that heavy golden coastal light, so different from the gray sky I'd lived under for 40 years. Whatever the reason, within a week of standing on that dock, I had spent 3 evenings reading about small towns on the Outer Banks, places with populations under 5,000, with farmers' markets and community libraries and local diners where the waitresses called you by your name. I found Ocracoke, population 1,100, an island community technically, accessible by ferry, a single main road, a harbor full of small boats, salt marshes and creek water the color of dark tea, wild ponies that the locals called bankers, a senior community center that a woman named Clara apparently ran with the energy of a person half her age, a watercolor painting class that met on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I requested information. I spoke to a local realtor named Donna on the phone for 45 minutes. She described a small white cottage near the creek with a screened-in porch and a kitchen that had been recently updated and a garden that the previous owner had planted with native grasses and coastal flowers that more or less took care of themselves. I asked her to send me the photos. I looked at those photos for 3 days. On the 4th day, I called Donna back and said I wanted to see it in person. I drove down on a Thursday morning and arrived in the late afternoon, when the light was doing what I had hoped it would do. Donna met me at the ferry. She drove me down the single main road with the windows down, the salt air coming in strong and clean and a little cold for April, and I looked out at the harbor and the boats and the marsh grass bending in the wind. The cottage was exactly what the photos had suggested, and somehow better in person. Small, solid, a screened porch that looked directly out over the creek, and beyond the creek, a marsh that turned different colors at different times of day. A kitchen with a good window over the sink, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with a deep tub, a linen closet that smelled like cedar. I stood on the porch for a long time watching the creek. A blue heron landed in the shallows about 30 feet away and stood there, absolutely motionless, watching me back. I told Donna I'd take it. I planned everything in complete secrecy. I want you to understand that, not because I was playing games, not because I wanted to be cruel or dramatic, but because I had spent 3 years watching how quickly the people in my life could move on without me, and I did not trust that they would not find some way to talk me out of this, to redirect me back into the orbit of their convenience. I listed my house with a realtor in the next county. I hired a moving company from a town 40 miles away. I transferred my medical records to a doctor in Ocracoke. I opened a new local bank account. I quietly contacted the church and the book club and the 3 or 4 friends I actually trusted, and I told them in confidence where I was going. I did not tell Tammy. I did not tell Noah. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple expecting their first baby. They walked through it with their hands clasped together, and they loved the garden, and they asked about the built-in bookshelves in the study that Robert had constructed himself over a long winter. The young man ran his hand over the wood the way you touch something you're already claiming. Signing the papers felt like finishing a book I'd been reading for 40 years. Closing a chapter written in ink that had faded to invisibility, words nobody had bothered to read while there was still time. I scheduled the move for the week after Easter. Easter, which would come and go as it had every year for the last 3 years, without my name on an invitation, without a call asking whether I wanted to come, without anything except a photograph posted to social media of dyed eggs and a spiral ham, and my grandchildren in their pastel Sunday clothes, looking beautiful and entirely unaware that their grandmother existed in a house 3 miles away, waiting. That Easter, for the first time, I did not even open the social media app. I knew exactly what I would see. I didn't need to see it. Instead, I spent the day wrapping things: Robert's photographs in clean white tissue paper, the wedding china in bubble wrap and then in newspaper, and then in boxes marked fragile and handled by my handwriting that was still good and clear. Books, letters, the small things that constitute a life when you strip away the furniture, the objects charged with memory, the things that would mean nothing to a stranger at an estate sale, and everything to me on a specific Wednesday in March 30 years ago, when Robert had picked them up and handed them to me without explaining why. The movers came on a Tuesday morning. There were 3 of them, young men, efficient and polite, who worked quickly and without a great deal of conversation. By 2 in the afternoon, the house was empty. I stood in the living room doorway. The walls had darker squares where the pictures had hung for decades. The paint around them faded to a different shade of cream. The floors had small, worn paths in the wood where the traffic had been heaviest, in front of the stove, in front of the sink, at the foot of the stairs. A whole human life written in wear patterns on hardwood. I slept that last night on an air mattress in the middle of the living room floor, in the dark, listening to the house make its nighttime sounds. The furnace cycling, the settling of walls against the cold. Small sounds I had heard 10,000 times and would never hear again. Wednesday morning, I loaded my car with the things I'd kept separate from the moving truck. My clothes, Robert's ashes in their urn, the photo albums, a small wooden box of letters he had written me over the years, beginning with the first one in 1974 when he was 23 years old and very earnest and uncertain about whether I would write back. I did a final walkthrough: kitchen, living room, the study with the empty bookshelves, the bedroom, the bathroom, the hallway where the children's height marks were penciled into the doorframe, still there, 40 years of growing. Tammy, age 5, Noah, age 3, Tammy, age 9, the last one from the summer Emma was visiting, and Robert had lined her up against the frame for old time's sake. I stood in front of those pencil marks for a while. Then I walked out the front door, locked it, and handed the key to the realtor's lockbox. Then I got in my car and drove south. The drive took 2 days. I stopped in small towns along the way, ate in diners where the waitresses called me honey, and refilled my coffee without being asked. I slept in a motel in a town I had never been to and would never return to, and I ate the complimentary breakfast in a small beige room with 3 other travelers, and nobody spoke, and it was the most comfortable morning I had in a long time. With every mile, something shifted inside me. Not freedom exactly, not yet. Something quieter than that. Something more like the feeling you get in the first few days after a fever breaks, when the world comes back into focus and you realize the illness is behind you. I arrived at the cottage on a Friday afternoon in late April. The ferry crossing was 20 minutes, and I stood on the deck the whole time with the salt air coming in off the water, watching the island get larger and more specific as we approached. When the ramp lowered and I drove off onto the island road, the light was doing exactly what it had done the first time I visited. Donna had left a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter and a handwritten note, "Welcome home, Ruth." I stood on the screened porch and watched the creek until the light went. 7 weeks passed. 7 weeks of the coastal morning routine settling around me like a second skin. 6 a.m. walk along the harbor road, the fishing boats already out. 8 a.m. coffee on the porch, with the creek changing color as the sun rose. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, watercolor class in Clara's studio. Clara, who was 68 and had the energy and opinions of a woman who had decided some years ago to stop being polite about things that didn't deserve politeness. Friday evenings, the book club, which met at a rotating set of houses and had apparently been going on for 11 years and had very specific feelings about certain genres of fiction. Marcus, who ran the bait shop by the harbor and had lived on the island his whole life, started saving me a seat at the Saturday morning breakfast the regulars held at the small diner on the main road. Helen, who was in the watercolor class and made the best brownies I had ever tasted and was not modest about it, started calling me on Sunday afternoons just to talk about nothing in particular. I joined the Senior Center's garden committee. I walked 3 miles every morning and watched the herons in the marsh. I painted the creek in the morning light, the dark tea-colored water and the marsh grass and the boats in the harbor. And I got better at it, week by week, in the way you get better at things when you do them because you want to, rather than because someone needs something from you. For 7 weeks, nobody called. Not Tammy, not Noah, not a single one of the grandchildren. 7 weeks of silence from people who lived 3 miles from my old house, people who had my phone number, people for whom I had driven through snowstorms and baked $200 worth of Christmas cookies every December for 30 years. And I won't tell you it didn't hurt. It did. There were evenings, usually Sunday evenings for some reason, the light going gray over the marsh, the island quieting down, when I sat with the hurt the way you sit with an old injury, not surprised by it anymore, but not immune either. But I also noticed something. The hurt was a different shape than it used to be. Back on Elm Street, the hurt had been the shape of a question. What did I do wrong? What is wrong with me that my own family doesn't want me? How do I fix this? Here, the hurt was just the shape of the truth. It didn't ask anything. It was simply what it was, and I could look at it clearly and put it down and go call Helen about the book club. The difference, I would later understand, was that I had built something that belonged to me. Not to my role as someone's mother or someone's grandmother or someone's convenience. To me, Ruth, who I actually was when nobody needed anything. And then my phone rang. I was on the porch, as I so often was by then, mixing a blue-gray watercolor to match the exact shade of the heron's wing. The afternoon was warm, the creek moving in its slow, determined way. A small boat was anchored out in the middle, 2 people fishing quietly. The salt air was doing its particular thing, not strong enough to be called a smell, just a quality of the air itself, as if the whole atmosphere had been very slightly seasoned. My phone buzzed against the old wooden table. Tammy. I looked at her name for a moment. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I watched the heron take a slow, unhurried step through the shallows. On the 4th ring, I picked up. Her voice was not the voice I expected. I had expected anger, the voice she used when something had gone wrong with the house, the contracted tone of a woman identifying a problem to be resolved. But it wasn't that voice. It was thinner, uncertain, almost frightened. "Mom, where are you? I drove past the house and there's a blue sedan in the driveway that I don't recognize, and the key doesn't—" A pause. "Mom, the key doesn't work." I looked at my hands in my lap, the thin skin over the knuckles, blue veins I'd stopped being surprised by. The paint on my fingertips, a particular color between blue and gray that I had been working on for a week. "Why do you ask, Tammy?" I said softly. "Did something happen?" "Did something happen? Mom, there are different people living in our house." "Your house?" I said. "When did it become your house?" Silence. Not a pause this time. A full, specific silence. The kind that happens when someone has asked a question they are not ready for the answer to. "Mom," she said, and now her voice had changed again, dropped lower, slower, as if she was finally hearing what she'd just said. "Mom, where are you? What happened? Are you okay? Did someone take advantage of you? Did someone—" "I'm fine, Tammy." I put my brush down gently on the edge of the jar. "I sold the house. I moved." "You—" Another silence. "When?" "About 7 weeks ago." The silence after that was the longest one yet. I waited. "7 weeks?" she said finally. "You've been gone for 7 weeks and you didn't— Why didn't you—" "You didn't call," I said, simply, not with accusation, just as a statement of fact. "In 7 weeks, you didn't call to check on me. Neither did Noah. I didn't tell you I was leaving because in 7 weeks, nobody asked." I heard her breath catch. "Mom, I'm watching a heron on the creek," I said. "It's a beautiful afternoon. I'm painting. I'm going to a book club dinner on Friday. I'm doing well, Tammy. I'm doing better than I've been in 3 years. She started crying then, not quietly, openly, with the ragged breathing of someone who has been hit by something they should have seen coming and didn't. I listened without saying anything. It took them 3 weeks to find my address. I later learned they had hired a private investigator. The bill, which Noah mentioned almost proudly when he eventually told me the story, was $1,200. $1,200 to track me to a cottage in coastal Carolina. They could not find 5 minutes in 3 years to call and ask if I wanted a plate of ham on Christmas Eve. But $1,200 to find out where I'd gone? That they could manage. They arrived on a Saturday morning, Tammy and Noah together, which surprised me. They had flown into a city 2 hours away and driven a rental car across the ferry and down the island road and up my gravel driveway. I saw the car from the porch before they knocked. I put down my coffee cup and walked to the door. They looked like themselves and also different. Tammy had her hair pulled back, no makeup, which she never did, and her eyes were red and puffy in a way that suggested she had been crying recently and repeatedly. Noah was holding himself the way men hold themselves when they are trying not to show how bad they feel, shoulders high and forward, jaw set. I opened the door. "Come in," I said. "I'll make coffee." We sat at the kitchen table, my small, good kitchen table with the window over the sink and the view of the garden. Tammy looked at the room the way people look at the version of a story they weren't there for, trying to absorb 40 details at once to understand a life they had not witnessed being built. "It's nice," Noah said, and he meant it. "I know," I said. We drank coffee. There was a long silence. Then Tammy put her cup down and looked at me. "Mom, we are so sorry." I nodded. "I mean it. I've been I've been sick about this for 3 weeks, since I found out. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't. 3 weeks, I said. She stopped. You've been sick about it for 3 weeks, I said, not unkindly. And I was sick about it for 3 years. I just didn't have anyone to tell. The look on her face then was something I will carry a long time. Not guilt, exactly. Something deeper than guilt. The face of someone who has understood something irreversible. We kept thinking we were being considerate, Noah said. We told ourselves you wanted space, that you needed quiet, that you'd let us know if you needed something. Did I ever ask for quiet? I said. Did I ever say that? In any conversation, any text message, any phone call, did I ever once ask you to leave me alone? Neither of them spoke. I asked to come for Thanksgiving, I said, and Christmas, and your daughter's birthday, Noah, and the lake house. I asked, or I tried to ask, and each time I was told that I probably wanted to rest, or that I seemed tired, or that it was going to be a small gathering, or that plans had already happened and I'd missed them. We know, Tammy whispered. We know. And then I stopped asking. Because asking and being told no, or being told yes and then finding out the event had happened the previous night without me, is more painful than simply not asking. I learned to stop asking, and I think you assumed that meant I had stopped wanting. I looked at them both. I never stopped wanting. I just stopped hoping. Tammy was crying again. Noah's jaw was working the way it did when he was fighting not to. I let them sit with it for a moment. Then I said, I'm going to tell you my terms. First, I said, I am never moving back north. This is my home now. The salt air suits my lungs. The people here know my name without needing a tragedy to remind them to look. This cottage is mine, and I intend to die in it many years from now in a state of contentment. Second, you will call me every Sunday at 7 in the evening, not while you're driving, not while you're walking through a grocery store with your ear tilted toward the phone, sitting still in a quiet room with your full attention available. Third, you will never again assume what I want. You will extend the invitation with a date, a time, a specific ask, and you will allow me the dignity of making my own choice. You do not get to decide what I need. I am 71 years old, and I have been deciding what I need since before you were born. Fourth, you will tell Emma and Jack the truth. Not that Grandma moved away because she wanted a quiet retirement. You will tell them that you forgot her, and that she had to build her own home because yours did not have a room for her anymore. They are old enough to understand what thoughtlessness looks like, and they need to understand it so they don't grow into adults who practice it on you. Noah flinched. That's a hard thing to tell your kids, he said. Living alone on your 71st birthday while your family posts photographs of a lovely brunch is also a hard thing, I said, but I managed it. He was quiet. Fifth, I continued, if the calls stop, if the invitations disappear, if you slide back into the comfortable pattern of assuming I am fine because I am not in front of you asking to be seen, we are done. I will not argue about it. I will not call and beg for access to my own grandchildren's lives. I will simply be done, and I will be fine, because I have built something here that does not require you in order to hold together. I looked at them both for a long moment. Those terms, David said slowly, are harsh. Those terms, I said, are what I need to survive this relationship with any self-respect intact. Take them or leave them. I have a book club dinner tonight and I don't intend to miss it for people who have consistently chosen to show up too late. They looked at each other. Tammy took a breath. We'll take them, she said. All of them. Whatever it takes. I stood up and carried the coffee cups to the sink. Good. You can bring the grandchildren tomorrow at noon. Today, I'd like you to go. I have things to do, and I need some time to decide how I feel about all of this. They left 20 minutes later, their rental car raising a small cloud of dust on the gravel road. I watched it from the porch until it disappeared. Then I called Helen. "They came," I said when she picked up. "I knew they would," she said. "You coming to the potluck tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. The next day they brought the grandchildren. Emma was 15 now, tall, her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, wearing a sweatshirt with a college name on it that was too large for her. She looked so much like my own mother, the mother I had lost at 43, that seeing her standing in my doorway made my throat close entirely for one full second. Jack was 12, quiet in the way that 12-year-old boys are quiet. Not shy exactly, but watchful, still figuring out what kind of person he was going to be. He was holding a small, flat stone he'd picked up from the harbor beach, turning it over and over in his fingers. They were nervous. I could see it in the way they stood close to each other, the way Emma glanced at her mother before she stepped inside. I was nervous too. We sat on the screened porch, the 5 of us, me, Tammy, Noah, Emma, and Jack, with the creek behind the screen and the salt air coming through, and the kind of silence that settles over people who have important history and don't quite know where to start. I started with the watercolors. I showed Emma how to mix the blue-gray that matched the exact shade of the heron's wing, a specific color that required 3 blues and a touch of something almost brown, a color that was never the same twice because the heron's wing was never quite the same in different light. She was careful and focused, and she had my mother's long fingers, the ones that were good at delicate things. I gave Jack the aluminum bowl and the bag of field peas and showed him how to shell them, running his thumbnail along the seam and pushing the peas out into the bowl with his thumb. He was surprisingly good at it, quickly finding a rhythm, and the sound of peas dropping into the metal bowl filled the porch in a comfortable, domestic way. We talked slowly, about the island, about the heron, about the ferry, about Jack's soccer team and Emma's art class, and the small, flat stone from the harbor, which turned out to have a fossil embedded in one side, a tiny spiral shell, millions of years old, pressed into gray rock. About their lives, which I had missed almost entirely. About mine, which they had not known was happening. Before they left, Emma stood up and came around the table and put her arms around me. She was taller than me now, her arms long, her grip stronger than I expected. "I'm sorry we didn't know, Grandma," she said very quietly into my hair. "Mom told us last night." She cried. "We didn't know you were alone all those times." I held her face in my hands, her clear young eyes, my mother's eyes. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," I told her. "But now you know where the house is. You don't need an invitation to write me a letter." Jack, on the way out, held out the stone with the fossil. "Here," he said, "you can have it, for your porch." I put it on the railing where I could see it from my chair. That was 14 months ago. The machine has not broken down yet. I watch its gears, as I said I would, with a healthy and specific caution. Not paranoia, not expectation of failure, just the watchfulness of a woman who has learned that comfort and good intentions are not the same thing as reliability. Tammy calls every Sunday at 7. She is sitting still when she calls. I can hear the difference. Noah sends small, awkward texts throughout the week, photographs of his lawn, updates on a corporate project that involves a great deal of jargon I don't follow, short videos of Jack's soccer games shot from the sideline at a slight angle, usually with someone's elbow in the frame. They are trying, in the specific, unpolished way of people who are not practiced at this and are doing it anyway because they decided to. Last November, they sent me a first-class ticket to Thanksgiving 6 weeks in advance. They called, not texted, and asked what time the car should arrive at the airport to pick me up. They asked whether I had any food concerns. They asked whether I wanted a window seat or an aisle. They asked what I wanted and let me answer. I accepted. I kept my return flight flexible. I am no longer a naive woman, and I see no reason to pretend otherwise. When I walked into Tammy's house on that Thursday afternoon, the dining room smelled exactly as it had for 40 years. Sage and roasting pecans, and the particular warm note of butter browning in a pan. A smell so embedded in my memory that it arrived in my chest before it arrived in my nose. And when I reached the table, I stopped. There was a small white place card in the center of the long wooden table. Not at the end where conversations trail off into murmuring. Not at the corner where the children historically spilled their drinks. In the center, between Emma and Tammy, directly under the chandelier, where the light was warmest and brightest. Ruth. My name in Tammy's handwriting. I stood there looking at it for a moment. During dinner, Noah stood up. He held his wine glass and looked across the table, and his face had gone a specific, uncharacteristic red. The face of a man saying something important that he has rehearsed, and is now discovering cannot be said the way he rehearsed it.
"I want to make a toast," he said. His voice was unsteady in a way his corporate clients would never recognize. "We wasted 12 years. We told ourselves we were being considerate, and we were being blind. We built our own comfort out of Mom's silence, and we hurt her in ways we are still working to understand. We cannot get those years back, those Christmases, those Easters, those birthdays. We cannot get them back, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." He stopped, started again. "What we can do is spend whatever time we have left making sure that she knows she is not an afterthought at this table, that she is the reason there is a table." Tammy reached across and took my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she whispered, "even when we gave up on you." Everyone was crying. Even Tom's mother, at the far end of the table where I used to sit, was dabbing at her eyes with a cloth napkin. I cried, too. I am not ashamed of it. The tears were warm, and they loosened something behind my ribs that had been locked in place for a long time, a small, stubborn knot of sorrow that had lived there so long I'd almost forgotten it was there. And then the weekend ended, and I got back on the plane and flew south. Because here is the thing that nobody tells you, the thing I wish someone had told me when I was 45 and still in the middle of building the life that would later disappear around me. The goal was never to make them feel guilty. I did not want guilt. I did not want apology dinners and carefully composed toasts and tears at the table. Those things are meaningful, and I am glad they happened, and I will hold them. But they were not the point. The point was to stop feeling invisible. And I had done that on my own. I had done it before they found me, before they drove down the island road in their rental car, before Emma hugged me on the porch. I had done it in the watercolor class on Tuesday mornings, in the book club on Friday evenings, in the Saturday breakfast at the Harbor Diner, in the sound of Helen's voice on Sunday afternoons, talking about absolutely nothing in particular. I had built a life that did not require anyone's permission to exist.
I have my own table now. It is small and weathered and sits on a screened-in porch over a creek in coastal Carolina. Every Thursday, Clara's chair is at the left side. Every Saturday morning, Marcus saves a seat for me at the diner. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I mix colors I could not have imagined 3 years ago and put them on paper, and sometimes they are even good. I have the coastal wind and the blue heron and the wild ponies that pass along the island road in the early morning, and a community of people who see me clearly because they choose to look. My family didn't abandon me when I moved away. They abandoned me years before that. One forgotten Sunday at a time, one unreturned text, one holiday that happened without me, one lake house weekend with a location tag left on by accident. Moving away just made the silence too loud for them to ignore. Sometimes the bravest thing an old woman can do is pack her own suitcases and save herself, even from the people she spent her entire life giving birth to, especially from them. My name is Ruth. I am 72 years old. I finally learned that being alone on a porch by the water is a beautiful, sacred thing. But being invisible in a room full of your own blood, that is a slow death, and nobody should ever have to accept it. If this story reached you today, if something in it felt familiar, if you sat here and counted the days, drop where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one.